Hello and welcome. You're listening to the Just Love Them podcast. I'm your host, Shiree Best. Join me on a journey to understand and to find peace with those we love who have left the faith. Today, my special guest is Becky Davidson. She is a former tenured assistant professor of English, a literary researcher, a published author, and a longtime storyteller. She's a mother of 4 beautiful humans, 2 sons, 2 daughters. Her youngest turns 21 next week. She's passionate about growing in all forms, about evolving and learning and strength building. She has come to believe that the journey is more significant than the destination, and her approach to mothering in recent years, particularly since the pandemic, involves a deep honoring of her kids as journeyers with their own gifts, agency, and discoveries. She describes herself as a seeker, as someone in search of deeper wisdom and understanding. As such, she draws from a variety of wisdom traditions, helping her gather tools for her own journey arc. She has come to believe that there is an upside to stress. It helps us grow. Welcome, Becky.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here.
Oh, I'm so excited to have you. So Becky and I had a phone conversation not too long ago. I actually got connected to you because you met my husband on some sort of a business thing, and he thought that you and I should connect. And so on this conversation with Becky that I had with her on the phone, just so many gems came out. I almost felt like I just wish I could have recorded that conversation and posted it, but I didn't have the ability to do that. And so I've invited Becky to be here with me today, and she has a couple stories that she's going to tell us. I'm really excited to have you, and I just feel so connected with you as a fellow seeker. So Becky, tell us a little bit about you, your family, and your situation that makes you applicable to being on this podcast.
Sure. Well, as I said, I've got 4 grown kids, 2 sons, 2 daughters. Each one is a wholly unique. And I think I thought early on in my mothering career that I was, well, because I had all the answers, right? When I was young, and particularly before I started into my mothering journey, I thought I had all the answers. And I thought that if I was somebody committed to living a certain kind of way, that my mother arc, my mother journey would somehow be magically easy.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I've discovered along the way that each of my kids is their own journeyer. And it took me probably until the pandemic to really learn to respect that in a deep way. And I think the reason for that is that the pandemic sort of broke our family a little bit. I know it was difficult, really difficult for a lot of folks, but we had a journey with our youngest. At the time, he was playing club and school lacrosse. He had a 3.6 GPA. He was a curfew respecting, sort of super stand-up kid, easy to manage up to that point. And there was something that happened at the beginning of the pandemic. I'm not sure what it was. Maybe just his determination not to be constrained by this injunction that we all stay inside. And so early on, he told us in no uncertain terms, I'm not staying in. And he didn't leave during the day. I think he recognized, at least early on, the importance of trying to not be a danger to other humans or be endangered by them. And so he would leave in the middle of the night sometimes. He'd get together with a couple of friends. And I still remember a photo that he showed me a couple months after this. He and the 2 friends were standing on I-15 right on the freeway. I don't know if it was northbound or southbound, but they were standing there. There were no cars. There was not another human around. And they had parked and they had gotten out and they had snapped a selfie of themselves with this look of defiance on their face. And I remember seeing the photo and thinking, yeah, this is like the perfect snapshot of who you were when we started into the pandemic. But I held on really tight. In some ways, I feel like that was so expected, so like me to want to just manage him and all the people in my life efficiently, skillfully. I had this realization as the weeks sort of dragged on and he became more and more defiant that I really was no longer in control and that I needed to find a way to manage this journey arc that he was on more wisely. But as you know, many of us come kicking and screaming to our big lessons. And so one night he was out late, his curfew had come and gone. And I was in our dining room looking out through the French doors, and I could see him. It was, an hour, maybe 2 hours even after curfew. I could see him crossing the neighbor's lawn across the street. And I knew that he was headed home at this point. And for whatever reason, I didn't want him to see me pacing, waiting up.
Mm-hmm.
And so I flipped off the lights and I started toward my bedroom. And I wheeled around on my feet and I smacked my face against the wall really, really hard, just as he was coming in. Oh. And I could hear something crack. I knew it was my nose, and I knew I had either fractured it or broken it. And the pain, honestly, was so sharp, it just dropped me. And so there I was, suddenly on my knees, and all of the emotion that I think I had been suppressing or pretending wasn't there, all of the worry, all of the kind of manic mother feeling that sometimes maybe we have when our kids kind of jump the rails, like all of that just found its way out. And I started sobbing, and I'm pressing my hands to my nose, and my son and my husband by now were just standing there kind of watching me. And I don't remember which one of them ran to get a washcloth with some ice that I could press to my face. Eventually I made it into the family room and kind of parked myself in a chair, and I was still crying. And these two had followed me in, and they were still standing there just with bewildered looks on their faces. It was just me sitting there in the family room, wailing like a baby at this point. And I just want to add, I really did think that maybe my nose was broken. And so that was frightening too. It wasn't. Probably there was a fracture. I feel like my nose is still a little out of joint. But once I calmed down, once we all went to bed, I remember lying there kind of staring up at the ceiling and thinking there's got to be a wiser way to do motherhood in this moment. And I thought, my worry is not helping him. My sort of frenetic attempts to contain him, that's not helping him. And of course, it wasn't helping me either. And I remember thinking, like, almost having this conversation with God, like, all right, I'm showing up in all my, my best energy, and somehow it's not good enough. And I remember having this moment where it was as if God, or maybe a higher version of myself, however you want to frame that, I just seemed to hear some kind of voice. And again, maybe it was just my own intuition, but telling me, if he goes farther down this path, can you live with that? And my first instinct was to think, no, I can't. I can't live with that. And then I thought, well, but wait a minute. By definition, I would be living with it if he did it. And I had this thought like, well, if he tries this, or he tries that, or he tries the other, could you live with that? And as I lay there, again, just staring up at the ceiling, kind of breathing and trying to get quiet, I thought, whatever this boy does, I will have to live with it. And so the question isn't whether I can contain him, or whether I can keep him on the path I want him on, or whether I can manage him, or even keep him safe, because he had this determination, as I said, to just like not be boxed in by the restrictions of the pandemic. And at least, as I said, he was leaving at night where he had minimal contact with people, but it was a really unusual kind of circumstance. And I just realized I cannot steer him. He doesn't want to be managed. He's going to do what he's going to do. And my job is to witness this unfolding and show up simply as wisely and lovingly as I can, recognizing that my son is his own journeyer, is doing his own thing. So that was the beginning of this journey for me of how do I show up well as a parent and not overmanage? How do I offer maternal affection and even guidance to my kids without wanting to constrain them too much? And, I mean, my youngest wasn't the first to occasionally want to journey in directions that maybe I wasn't comfortable with. But he was the one who did it during the pandemic at a time when we were all supposed to be, indoors, keeping safe.
Mm-hmm.
So as I lay there that night, just sort of having this like imaginal conversation with the divine or the beyond, whatever you want to call it or however you want to frame it, I thought, I have to take care of me so that I can show up in whatever way, hopefully elegantly, right? But whatever way the situation with my son demands. And I remembered too some adage, I don't remember where it came from, but it's this idea that you can be taught in this life by either a hammer or a feather. And I thought, I don't want to learn my lessons anymore with a hammer. I knew exactly what that felt like. It felt like a collision with the wall, and it was like unimaginably painful. And I thought I'd rather learn with a feather. I'd rather learn a little more quickly, a little more efficiently. I wanted to sort of, in some ways, reimagine myself as this mother whose expectations for like a certain level of respect or safety or whatever were clear, but who also understood that she could not manage her son's journey for him. So really, it was the beginning of reconstituting myself as a different kind of mother journeyer, knowing that I wasn't the boss of my son and he was going to do what he was going to do. And what could it look like to still have a robust relationship with him? And you know what, Shiree, almost the second I decided, sort of during that conversation with the sacred, with God, again, however you want to frame that, almost the second I sort of finished that conversation, I thought, I want to lean in differently, letting go of expectations about what's going to happen or should happen, and just being available for my son if he wants to connect. And the oddest thing was that in that energy of letting go and just surrendering, all outcomes. And that's the hardest part, I think, for moms. It's the all, right?
Yeah.
In that moment, I just had a kind of ease of being, like a deep peace, very counterintuitive given how worked up I'd been and what had happened with my nose. But very quickly after that, my son pivoted back into the relationship. He didn't necessarily, I don't know what the phrase would be, like he was still doing what he was going to do, but he was very open to sharing it with me, downloading to me, talking to me. Oddly,
he opened the conversation.
He did. And I remember one night, actually it was early morning, maybe 5 a.m. I heard him upstairs kind of moving around. And so I got up and went upstairs, and he was writing in a journal, and he'd written a poem about a green-eyed girl that he really fancied back then. And I don't know, he was just curiously open, invited me to sit down, read the poem to me out loud. He knew that I was a lover of poetry and formerly an English professor. And so he wanted to know, like, what were some of my favorite poems. So here we are. I'm with this son who otherwise has kind of defied all of our rules. And yet here he is in this really tender moment with me, opening his heart, sharing poems from his journal, talking about this young woman who, she ended up pretty quickly in the rearview mirror. He didn't realize that his interest in her was a little stronger than maybe hers in him. But we had many moments like that during the pandemic, Shiree.
Wow.
He'd come to me, or we'd be up, each of us, in the middle of the night, maybe I in my room and he in his, and then like he would even come to find me. And that became a practice too, where he'd want to talk. Or I think you mentioned in your intro that I'm a longtime meditator. Once or twice he wanted to meditate with me.
Wow.
And able to guide him through, a meditation moment or two. And those in some ways were really transformative for him. So I guess one of my biggest learnings, one of my most important takeaways from all this is that our children want to be connected to us. I really believe that. But sometimes they're going to do it on their terms and not ours. And especially in the teen years. And we know from research on the teen brain that they are overprimed for reward and underprimed to look at the long game and to really judge the consequences of their choices. And now that I understand that better, I realize sometimes what seems to us like their fail, that's their learning. And we can't always legislate that for them. But if they know, like they know deep down on a soul level, no, my mom loves me unconditionally. I can find her at 2 a.m. or wherever, and we can talk poetry or we can meditate or we can do whatever. I think that's what counts.
I agree. You almost had this literal hitting of a wall. Well, you did have a literal hitting of the wall.
I did.
It kind of was, it sounds like the catalyst for changing something in you, changing your thinking, changing, it kind of brought you, but you literally almost, you just had to hit this wall, and God did that with you literally and figuratively at the same time. That's really incredible. And it led, what you've described is that it's led to all this introspection and asking of questions and turning to God. And I loved what you said about letting go, how you were able to just let go and surrender, and that it happened so suddenly for you. I counsel people on how to do that, how to let go, how to surrender, how to basically trust God. And when we do that, God takes the pain and he takes the worry and he takes that, but we have to surrender it to him in order for him to take it. He's not going to take it against our will. If we want to hold all that pain, he will let us. But I love that you were ready and that you were willing to just give it to him, and he just took it. And look at what that led to. So beautiful with your son, those connection points. And you are absolutely right. They want to be connected to us. But sometimes there's so much stuff in the way that it makes it so hard for them to do it, because we've got all these feelings and emotions and these expectations, and there's just so much in between the relationship that it makes it really hard for them to know how to navigate that.
Well, I think it is interesting the way sometimes months and years can go by and we're parenting a certain way with kind of a certain narrative that's informing the way we're showing up. I think I thought I had to show up as this like perfect mother, whatever that is, whatever in the heck that is. I don't know. Like that's just such a damaging myth, I think.
A myth, definitely a myth.
And so discovering after many years of parenting, wait, I can kind of do this a little more intuitively or without maybe feeling constantly constrained. I seem to like that word during this conversation, but I too realized like I felt constrained by, in some ways, my religion. I felt like there was this expectation that I was going to demonstrate my level of faithfulness or whatever by how my kids were turning out. Like that would mean that I was and that's not okay. Like we need to stop that, you know? I mean, my kids and their journey arcs and their choices are not a report card on my parenting. They're not a referendum on my parenting. And really all I control ever is the way I show up. So yeah, the collision with the wall in some ways was like the physical piece of this collision with, as you said, you know, metaphorically speaking, with a way of being as a mother that had to break.
Yeah.
So that I could reimagine it.
Yeah. And what you said about, you know, sometimes their fail is their learning. Isn't it true with us as well? I have failed as a mother over and over and over, but that's my learning. And that's how it's meant to be. Same for all of us.
No, I totally agree. I think about, again, pacing the dining room that night as I was waiting for him to come home, because like, that's what a good mother does, right? She wakes up, paces. Maybe she's muttering a prayer or uttering blessings on her child or whatever she's doing. And there's nothing wrong with any of that. But I think when we are leashed to a story that things have to have a certain outcome in order for us and for our kids to be happy, that's a fantasy.
Yeah.
And I think as women of faith, it's our job to know that we're not here to live some kind of a fantasy, or to expect even that if all of these different variables line up just right in the calculus of our lives, then we're going to be happy. Then we're going to be happy. I think we're here to journey, which by definition means that we're going to have setbacks and challenges and smackdowns, and we're going to be disturbed sometimes. And so my kind of reimagined understanding of myself as a mother at this point, and I've been doing it for 31 years, is that my job is to be strong, to be sort of this warrior woman, not like to keep my kids, quote unquote, safe from the world. Like, I don't even think we can do that anymore.
No.
But we can also strengthen them by being open, honest, transparent, by having hard conversations, by showing up sometimes in moments that are inconvenient, in order hopefully to also be able to just like zip our mouths shut so that our kids can talk. I remember there were a couple of times when my son wanted to talk to me about stuff that was really sensitive. And I remember having the thought like, okay, hopefully my eyeballs don't pop out of my head right now. Hopefully I can just stay quiet and listen well. And then if he wants feedback, he's going to ask for it, or I'm going to ask once I know he's completely done. Like, do you want to know what I think, or do you just need me to be a listener? So
I love that question. Say that one more time for me.
Do you want to know what I think, or do you just need me to be a listener right now?
Wow, that's a beautiful question, because it gives them permission to feel safe and to be heard. What a beautiful question.
Well, and that's a hard one too, because I think as moms, especially if we're still tethered to the old narrative, which is that we have to be perfect so that then our kids can be perfect. Like, actually, it's really hard to be in conversation with a child that maybe you're a little worried about and not want to jump in and interrupt and offer your opinions, and to just listen well. I mean, that requires like ninja level skill,
Oh, it does. And what you said about the keeping your face just completely, normal, that I have practiced that too. And that is so essential to having those kind of conversations. If you can't do that, if you're going to look shocked or devastated or whatever, it stops them in their tracks. You have to learn that ninja skill.
And I think what it signals to them, like what that face telegraphs to a kid is, my mom can't handle this.
Yeah.
She can't hold this. And so therefore she's not my ally right now, because I'm going to have to hold my own pain, fear, shame, whatever it is, and hers too. And that's not fair.
Yeah.
So I feel like part of the mother journey is learning how to be the mother journeyer. And that's going to require that we experience heat, pressure, sometimes, the collision with the wall. But hopefully if we're learning, then we're going to just slowly, incrementally get better at showing up as the moms that each of us, honestly, like maybe deep down wants to be, or are destined to be, because I think it's no accident, honestly, that we're on this journey, maybe even with the humans who showed up to be our children,
Oh, yeah.
I feel like we're meant to learn things from each other. And, and sometimes they're my teachers, right?
Many times for me, many times. Yeah. Yeah.
I just have so much deep affection and care for your listeners. I don't know them, but I feel like we're all part of this tribe, learning how to kind of braid our faith and our faith practices into our mothering practices. And I think it's really important that we hold space for each other. on this journey and not judge each other. Sometimes I feel like there's a lot of judgment in the mothering space. And now that I've been at it for a while, I have a lot less judgment and a lot more grace for other mothers, maybe because I have more grace for myself, right? And I'm no longer trying to be perfect. And I would never wish that expectation on any other mother. It is like it just siphons away all the oxygen from your life to feel like you have to execute this perfectly. But I think to the extent that we can show up for each other in a spirit of non-judgment, in a spirit of grace and compassion, and also listening too, like we need to listen to each other better. Because sometimes what each of us needs is just to be able to tell our story to somebody else who's gonna just, hold space for us. So I think, there's a term that comes from Buddhism, which I've been a student of for many years now, as part of my meditation practice. And the term or the word is Sangha, and it means sacred community. And I can't think of a community on this planet ever, like generationally, geographically, culturally, whatever, that is more sacred in some ways than a mother community. So I just, from my heart, I'm just sending out love and blessings on the women who listen to this beautiful podcast and hoping that we can all find our stride, our right journey, and connect daily with a little bit of grace so that we can show up more skillfully and wisely on our mother arc.
Thank you so much for your beautiful thoughts. I want to just take a minute and talk about the articles that you've written, and I'm going to put them in links to them in the show notes. Becky has shared with me some links that I can share out, but talk just for just a minute if people wanted to hear more from you and read those articles, tell them a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, 2 of the articles discuss my journey with 2 of my kids' suicidal ideation. My younger daughter had a reckoning with this back in late 2020. That year was a train wreck. I think we all know that. And it really took its toll on my daughter, who was at university and sort of just unraveled as a result of all that was going on late that year. So part 1 of my story about managing my kids' suicidal ideation talks about my daughter and the way I attempted to show up wisely for her. The other article talks about my walk with my youngest, my son, same one who kind of jumped the rails back in 2020. In late 2022, he too had a reckoning with suicidal ideation. And there's nothing more terrifying, like ever, than realizing that, like, you want your kids to have this tender relationship with themselves and with life and with the business of living. And when they lose that, all bets are off. And so it is time to really get skillful at that point. And I felt that I could not do it without a sense of surrender, a sense of grace. Like I really was seeking help to try to show up well. And each of my kids sort of was having suicidal fantasies for different reasons. My son had a really bad breakup. He'd been in a relationship with a beautiful young woman who herself was really struggling. And so I don't know that there's anything more demanding, but if you're curious at all, you can read about my journey with these kids. And, there's been a little bit of a conversation that's happened just in my DMs on the Medium platform, which is where these pieces published. So I know that there are lots of other parents, moms and dads out there worried about their kids, wanting to show up skillfully. And again, to be in conversation with other people about some of these really challenging moments is a sacred opportunity. I don't think we're meant, any of us, to do this alone. So
I agree. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. And for my listeners, I will put those links in the show notes so you can find her articles there. And this podcast is meant to offer support to you. So if you know others who need support, please share this podcast with them. In addition to that, you can find support on the private Facebook group, Just Love Them. If you haven't joined that, that's a great place where you can ask questions, where you can get support from others and you can give support yourself. If you would like a one-on-one conversation with me to do some counseling, I offer free mini sessions We can just talk. I'm happy to listen, help you with anything I can to help you find your way back to peace and to understanding and how to give your pain to God. Thank you for joining me, listeners. And thank you, Becky, for joining me today. It's been a delight to get to talk to you today.
Oh, thank you so much for the invitation. It has been beautiful. And you, my friend, are just a beautiful human. And your heart just shimmers. I can see it even, from my screen. So thank you for the invitation.
Oh, you're so welcome. We were meant to connect.
Thank you again.
And listeners, please join me again next time for another episode of Just Love Them.